Inejiro Koizumi proudly presents HATEBAKE, Our Amplified Earth, Episode 7. It just felt so good. The rush of adrenaline, the short, quick breaths, the eyes darting from place to place, the fear of being caught. Kleptomania wasn't so much of an affliction for Lindsey Welles. It was her new joie de vivre. And really, what was to be expected of her since Clyde cooled off? The things Lindsey did for that ingrate, too. Following high school, she went under the knife and got her chest enlarged, using the Patel method, which, of course, made Clyde happy despite the brutal healing period. Lindsey endured the nematode-based conditioning like a champ, but it was ultimately the swelling that did her in. With breasts now perfectly sculpted and more real-feeling than before the operation, Lindsey thought her husband and high school sweetheart was at last satisfied. After a few years and a few vacations, lavish cruises, multi-month hikes, long drives on the weekend, costume dinner parties, and even polo lessons, Lindsey wanted children. "Clyde, what are we doing?" she would always start. "Oh, honey, I want kids too," Clyde would always stop. Clyde typically ended his child-related statements with some sort of quip about the men with children at his job being, so behind in their quotas, or how their wives seemingly lost interest in them once the kids were born. After his typical saccharine pat-on-the-head remarks, Lindsey would always smile the same smile that never failed to put Clyde at ease. Once her man had settled to an even simmer, she would then leave the situation and go lose herself in her garden. Clyde would often get upset about Lindsey's deep and frequent trips, aided by her precious, meticulously maintained, lysergic cherry blossoms. Anytime he really needed her, she could be found glossy-eyed and clown-faced with a small collection of cherry blossoms plucked, used, and discarded not far from her. Sometimes Clyde would just stand and watch her sail through the stars. Sometimes she spoke out loud. Sometimes she touched herself. One time, she burst into an uproarious fit of laughter. Clyde, too, would go to the garden, when he wasn't tinkering or adjusting something he had installed in their sprawling estate, and pluck a small blossom of his own alprazolam-infused frangipani. Holding the small white flower just below his nose, he would daintily sniff and welcome the amplified pollen into his body. The effect stamped out any anger or disgust he had built within himself from the notion and action of his wife checking out after she got home from her job at the Ilgauskas Annex in downtown. Clyde didn't mind her use of lysergic cherry blossoms by itself. He was irritated that anytime Lindsey seemingly faced something challenging or didn't get her way, from his perspective at least, she would pluck a blossom or two and spend the next few hours in her own world. And kids? She was relentless in her desire for a brood of her own. There was a rough patch lasting an entire winter wherein Lindsey spiked not just the frangipani, but also the phlox and even the MDMA marigolds, using some specialized bees she brought home from work. She imbued their garden with a powerful aphrodisiac, stopped eating her daily allotment of silphium, and pounced on him the minute he entered the house. When he woke up in the morning, he woke to her straddling him. There were even a few occasions in which she surprised him at his office. To Clyde, all of the aforementioned behavior epitomized his princess, the former homecoming queen and valedictorian simply reacting to not getting what she wanted. All the while executing an overall banal attempt at trying to force her will and desires upon him at last after so many years of following his lead and direction. Clyde did care, or at least that's what he told himself when he would sit and watch her trip. He cared so much that his reasoning had led him to believe that children would be a disaster. Clyde had worked carefully and shrewdly to build the world the two of them occupy. He built the house after designing it. He took cooking classes simply to give weight to his opinion when choosing to invest in local restaurants. It was Clyde who spent late nights studying in preparation for the exams needed to climb the ladder at Sharmacorp. Adding children to their special mix would sour the entire batch. Lindsey Welles put her Luxwork Lance into gear, checked her mirrors, and pulled into the third level of air traffic treacherously high above the surface streets at precisely 12:15 p.m. The molded leather seats warmed her perfectly settled 40-inch hips. Reaching into her mother-of-pearl-lined clutch, Lindsey withdrew her latest acquisition, a $500 gold hummingbird oil-based lipstick. The polychromatic substance glistened in the reflection of her chrome steering wheel. Lifting this particular piece was easier than she had anticipated. The woman at the sample counter was overly concerned with some personal issue that relentlessly stole her attention. Lindsey waited, calculated, then struck. Within seconds, the lipstick went from boxed on the counter to naked and in her clutch. Despite her success, though, Lindsey didn't get quite the same rush as she usually did. The woman's preoccupation made it slightly too easy for Lindsey's taste. She liked the danger, the thrill. It was all she had now. Lindsey kicked around these thoughts as she aimlessly cruised the skies of the capitalist empire of the restored Los Angeles. Where to now? Her job was under the impression she was on sabbatical. A trip to the now radiation-free Principality of San Francisco for in-depth training on cultivating more stable plant hybrids. In reality, she paid for her cousin to go in her stead and fill her in upon her return. Clyde was led to believe she's dutifully at work, and as he is one never to drop in, both parties remained content with their individual statuses. Lindsey cruised past what those on this side of it called the Living Tunnel, an opulent botanical thoroughfare that linked Los Angeles to the richest sector of the entire American territories, the armored Beverly Hills. Glancing at the time and several swords filing into the single-level traffic of the tunnel, she decided then and there to get another fix. The tunnel was nestled snugly in the Hollywood Hills and was lined with an endless variety of perennials. Kudzu, phlox, red creeping thyme, Indian azaleas, bamboo, and on and on. In addition to the more ornamental flora, a small variety of amplified, air-cleaning plants were bred to keep residents breathing only the purest of air. The V. cuniculum, or VC for those on that side, existed as one of the many means of control and separation for the infantile residents of the ABH. Ever fearful of what new money, or those simply without money, may do at any given moment, the gentry herein constructed, read bought, their own private army, read police force, a containment field, or glorified plasmatic cage, and the singular, heavily guarded entrance you've already been introduced to. Although there are rumors of holes in the grid. Ways into the armored Beverly Hills desperately denied by the system's architect, P. Maxwell Chong. The tunnel ended, and Lindsey said goodbye to the plants she helped develop and propagate at Ilgauskas. Before her, like a bride on her wedding night, lay the armored Beverly Hills. Everywhere one looked, there was decadence, gold water fountains issuing forth water purified by amplified mango trees. Marble staircases, platinum parking meters that only accepted gold fragments, Baroque columns and Georgian ironwork, all of it gilded and bejeweled, drowning out the more mundane artisan stone and woodwork. Here, nearly every entertainer and magnate either lived or colluded under the watchful eyes of the Brigade, the aforementioned police force who ensures the residents' absolute protection. The same group is also responsible for the armored portion that now precedes any mention of Beverly Hills. Comprised mostly of androids with exposed cerebral circuitry, the Brigade was programmed to perform only with excellence. Their muted green and silver uniforms allowed them to both stand out and blend in as determined by whatever present need of the citizens they served. If a wealthist, the name they chose for themselves, is in some sort of need, the ambient wireless neural network detects the need, and the nearest member of the brigade will begin to shimmer, indicating his ability to assist. Like a great bowl, the armored Beverly Hills sat lined with towers and walls and gunships. Outsiders would look in despair, thinking how prison-like the residents' existence must be. Yet those inside and under brigade protection look out and shudder at the thought of living in what was perceived to be a nouveau Wild West. Lindsey pulled her cerulean Luxwerk lance into the valet queue and waited for one of the local teens to graciously pilot her car to a lodging. The young man smiled when he saw her beauty and her hips switching as she walked away from him. The teen parked her skysword upright in a cozy spot between two others. Her sparkling white dove-feather heels clicked and announced her arrival to the eagerly waiting employees of the department store she sauntered into. Through her large-frame sunglasses, she took in all that lay before her, including the time. The clock pointed to exactly 1:15 p.m., meaning that if she played this right, she could make it over to Hugo Wong and collect the electrum and opal navel ornament she'd had her eye on. Which department first, she thought. Her opalescent white gloves and plunging chartreuse sundress helped her blend in. Being born and raised in Los Angeles, were she to arrive in the hills wearing garb typical of her upbringing, she would have been turned around and escorted right back out. The residents of the hills truly relished in their sense of superiority and used their contrived eliteness to discriminate as often and as thoroughly as they could. Lindsey made her way through the rare construct and chose an understaffed jewelry counter to be her next victim. "Hello there," Lindsey's voice chirped. "Why, hello, madam, and welcome to Al-Uaha, the oasis. How may I be of service to you?" The tall, olive-skinned woman smiled, revealing a crisp set of gleaming platinum teeth. The woman's thick black hair tumbled down her back into a unique braid with gems woven in. Lindsey deeply enjoyed klepting, as she came to call it, in the hills because of people like this woman. Here she is, trying to recreate an era she wasn't even alive to experience, the posh consumer era. And simply because of who she's sleeping with or what she knows about someone in the community here, she now has a job in servitude to unnecessarily rich women who willingly live in a bubble falsely created and ruthlessly maintained. "Well, to be honest," Lindsey continued, "I'm interested in those new crypto emeralds, and I was wondering if I may peruse a few." Lindsey knew exactly what a crypto emerald was and where they came from, and Numa, the woman behind the counter, sauntered as carefree as ever into the trap Lindsey was setting. "Excellent choice. Those are certainly a hot item at the moment." Moving with utmost grace, Numa pulled the display of crypto emeralds from their housing and set them before Lindsey. "Oh my," Lindsey intoned. "Yes, they are certainly something to behold." Numa highlighted the flaming galaxies inside each stone and then proceeded to lay out several loose ones, as well as a few mock-ups of potential settings. Lindsey, truly enamored with the shiny rocks, pretended to be in a heated SMS exchange while looking over the stones. Her pretense kept Numa feigning an adherence to privacy, which allowed for Lindsey to initiate a program on her device that war-dialed the store she was in, choking all the lines with people asking questions. In reality, the application on her phone called each line in the store with the same recording playing in repetition in different vocal octaves. When the phone behind Numa rang, Lindsey prepared herself. Numa turned to answer the hello phone, and Lindsey scooped 3 of the 9 stones before her into her clutch, replacing them with plastic replicas made by a young man who happens to be enamored with her at Elgauskas. With the deed done, Lindsey called off her telephonic attack and now assumed a wan interest in the stones in front of her. "Ugh, man, am I right?" Lindsey quipped, indicating her phone. "Oh, I know what you mean. My husband—" "Honey, don't get me started on husbands," Lindsey cut in. "Listen, dear, I believe I am satisfied with your wares for the time being, and if I come home with another set of these, well, you know." Lindsey waggled her phone once more and smiled, turning without a chance for Numa to respond. Lindsey and her feathered heels departed. Seeing the time was now 1:45, and riding the wave of endorphins from her time spent at Al-Uaha, Lindsey trotted into the excessively posh crimson tent that housed the world of couture unnecessaries that was Hugo Wong. Upon entering, Lindsey was greeted by a topless Chinese woman. "Ni hao, welcome to Hugo Wong." A ceremonial bow was then given, which Lindsey proudly returned. "How may I direct your interest?" The jade chopsticks in the woman's onyx hair occasionally carried a gold electric arc that reminded Lindsey of the Jacob's ladder Clyde had built in the garage for fun. The last time I was here, I was quite taken by a certain navel ornament, she baited. Ah, yes. Please, follow me to our ornamentation district. My name is Feng Bao Jai, if you require anything further. Another grace-laden bow. The woman led Lindsey through a well-lit, suspended corridor with elevated views of the rest of Hugo Wong's playland. Everything being crowned with lanterns and lined with amplified flora. As Lindsey looked around, she was actually impressed with the commitment to the illusion of being in the heart of a bustling Chinese upper-class marketplace. Each department of the store was called a district, and each district had its own personality. The makeup district was full of stone-faced goddesses, artists working on up to 3 clients at a time. In the garment district, the largest and therefore only subterranean district, there were small electric rickshaws to shuttle shoppers from one end to the other. Remembering her purpose here, Lindsey snapped back to reality just in time to be introduced to the keeper and purveyor of all things shiny and superfluous. Ni hao, madam. I am Mei Li. Another clothing-challenged Chinese woman welcomed Lindsey to her realm. Feng Baozhai bowed once more and left the two to business. What can I satiate your interest with? The Sanbao navel ornament. A fine choice. Mei Li turned to retrieve the special Babinga wood box that housed the never-displayed piece of jewelry. As she turned, Lindsey slipped the faux replacement into her hand from her clutch. Here you are. Mei Li set the slide-top box on the glass counter and revealed the apparatus. It's gorgeous. Lindsey was actually quite taken by the sight of the neatly arranged opals. May I try it on? Lindsey asked coyly. Of course. Lindsey, still wearing that striking chartreuse sundress that plunged down to just below her navel, fixed the ornament in place and stared in awe. It's perfect. But if I bought this right now, my husband would have me deported, Lindsey cajoled with Mei Li. We do have a generous layaway period of 48 hours. Mei Li turned to locate a tablet for Lindsey to use. In the 15 seconds that Mei Li was not looking at her, Lindsey swapped the real ornament currently in her navel with the plastic copy. As Mei Li turned back around, Lindsey saw the time was approaching 2:30, and she would need to leave as soon as she could. Say, I think I'll just come back and buy it outright. I feel that would also be best. Tsai Chen. Mei Li accepted the copy back as the genuine and returned all elements to their housing. Lindsey thanked the well-endowed woman and left. Arriving back at the valet pool, Lindsey gave her ticket to the same young man and leaned over a bit to display what would ultimately be her tip for him. The boy, pleased with what he saw, brought her sky sword over ahead of several others waiting for theirs. With her sword now at her fingertips, she set the device in gear and pulled into the calm flow of single-level Beverly Hills traffic. Lindsey caught another glance at the time and knew that Clyde would be home soon. Clyde and their most recent neighbor, Lisa Tilden, cruised through the intersection, 2 swords in front of Lindsey. Her mouth agape, Lindsey missed the fact that the light changed. After all, she had just witnessed a documented impossibility. Lisa Tilden was a major player in the lead-up to Clyde and Lindsey being high school sweethearts. Being teammates on the nationally ranked high school polymatic football cheerleading team made them sisters. That is, of course, until a man got involved. After much turmoil and tumult, coupled with several occurrences that neither Clyde nor Lindsey understood at the time, the 2 close friends were now split, Clyde having sworn to never speak to Lisa again, with no explanation for Lindsey. Lindsey thought back and realized Clyde had cooled off close to 6 months earlier, about the same time Lisa and her husband Dirk moved in. Pondering ever deeper, she began to see inklings of Clyde's true feelings now manifesting themselves more heartily as of late. Her seeing Clyde out and about, unabashed and flippant in her eyes, only confirmed the magnitude of the situation before her. But it's so pretty. Stop it. Destroy it. Now. Blonde-haired and blue-rooted Lisa Tilden looked down at the acanthus-laden goldwork that adorned the universal remote. The depth of the carving felt good in her hands. The buttons were soft green velvet with raised gold numbers. The remote sat crowned with an ionized Oryxlexian ruby, always glowing. "But Vinal," the man struck Lisa on the right cheek, causing the remote to launch from her limp hand. "Great! See what you made me do," he barked. "Now where is it?" the man huffed as he scoured the small one-room apartment. Outside the window, the shag-carpeted orange-lined train screeched and chugged along. "Under the couch," Lisa said flatly. She gently straightened her hair and licked the inside of her cheek. "You need to stop using our inherited names. You never know who's listening." The man now took the remote from under the couch and turned on the garbage disposal. "Dirk, please." "Lisa," Dirk said, his rippling violet eyes taking hold of her soft orange irises. This icon is the embodiment of Privatonian suffering. The very fact that you even have this gives me full legal right, and in some cases duty, to kill you." He drew closer with every word. "Get it?" "I get it." Her eyes welling with tears, Lisa tore herself away from the situation and turned her gaze out of the window box in their living room. However, in the brief moment of closeness, the man caught a whiff of a dangerously familiar scent. Is that? "Your trunk!" he accused her with an ever-growing ardor. He marched up to her and flung her around to face him. "Dirk, it was just..." Another sharp slap. "You're poisoning your mind!" His voice climbed. "Don't you get it yet? Have you forgotten our time in Dixieland? What about Torque? Remember him? He doesn't remember us. He doesn't remember Privatoni, the mission, him. Nothing. He's trapped here now." Seething with contempt for his partner's latest unexplainable act of defiance, Dirk Tilden grit his teeth and trod his way to the garbage disposal. With a flick of the switch, the blades began to whir. Taking another look at Lisa, her gaze was fixed on an object outside the window. Dirk turned back and dropped the remote into the hole. There was no explosion, but rather an implosion. As the blades cut into the off-world metal, the sharp agitation jarred the ruby loose from its fitting, causing it to next feel the bite of the disposal blades. The ionized particles within caused the atomic makeup of the ruby itself to collapse recursively inward, generating a gray hole 1/4 the size of an ant's pupil. Within an instant, the entire kitchenette, the south wall, and part of the track that carried the recently passed Orange Line train had vanished. The two stood speechless. The noise had stirred several neighbors who were now clamoring their way to the apartment. As their voices and curiosity drew closer, Dirk said, "The Faisal, now." Lisa tore her focus from the heinous scene and raced to the bedroom. In her nightstand drawer was a gilded doctor's bag. Lisa threw the heavy receptacle onto the bed, spilling its contents. She pawed through the items and, "Hurry! They're here!" Lisa could hear the pounding on the door. Her heart's racing. She at last found the Faisal. Returning to the front room with her hands behind her back, she nodded at Dirk, who then turned and opened the door. "Yes," Dirk said nonchalantly. "Yes? Well, we heard quite the noise just a few seconds ago, and we're curious as to the..." "Now, please," Dirk said over his shoulder. Lisa revealed a now undulating ball of light. Each neighbor at the door could not help but stop talking and stare. Lisa hucked the Faisal at the gaping crowd and tightly shut her eyes. Dirk dropped to the carpet, closing his eyes as well. The Faisal came to a stop just above the crowd and began spinning. A hissing sound grew with intensity, so much so that no one in the crowd could think. As quickly as the Faisal began to spin, it shattered into 1,000,000,000,000 particles, spreading outward in a ring until any and all who had any sort of inkling of a peculiar occurrence at the Tilden's apartment now simply had none. All was forgotten. The crowd, now under the idea they were standing at the closed door of an intact apartment, began to mumble. and wonder aloud what they were doing out of their respective dwellings. As the crowd returned home, unaware of anything having happened in the past 20 minutes, Dirk and Lisa scrambled to gather their things. The Fizel did well in driving away any curious earthlings, but the large portion of missing track will be noticed in about 25 minutes when the next train would pass. Lisa finalized the escape location while Dirk prepared a letter to his boss detailing several true affairs with clients and a need for a speedy exit, in addition to readying an explanation for his Privatonian superiors as to why he and his partner had to relocate once more due to their own lack of synergy. Lisa finalized the escape location while Dirk prepared a letter to his boss detailing several true affairs with clients and a need for a speedy exit, in addition to readying an explanation for his Privatonian superiors as to why he and his partner had to relocate once more due to their own lack of synergy. Truthfully, however, it was not their lack of cooperability that chronically hindered their efforts. Once the pair had landed and fully taken over their human hosts, it was the tsunami of human emotion that impacted their ability to function more than either of them could ever realize. The degree to which the pair had been affected by the strength of the emotion bore itself out in the choosing of their next location. The pair had been in Chicagoland waiting for him to make a highly vaunted appearance. Taking care of him outside of his armored manor would have been routine for these two. But he came and left. Neither Privatonian could explain to the other why they missed their opportunity. But when he came and left, neither Privatonian could explain to the other why they missed their opportunity. "Why are you blaming me for all of this?" Lisa hollered back at Dirk. "Where were you when he was here?" "Shut up! Just stop it! This is all your fault!" Dirk barked. Distractions, time burglars, narco plants, the subtle nuances of human existence. After the Fizel incident, another unbridled emotion, typically much weaker in the Privatonian limbic system, emerged as a guide for Lisa's decisions. The longing for familiarity. A name surfaced in her mind's eye. From a pseudo-trance, Lisa summoned her nearby Admiral Borgnine. "Admiral?" "Why, hello, kiddo. Where can I take you on the Ultranet?" The sabulous and familiar greeting resonated from the portly rear admiral of the 7 digital Cs like 40 grit sandpaper against an arid pier. The sharply browed fellow, dressed in a regal 17th century British naval officer's uniform, bore an affable smile. A green glow enveloped the room as the Admiral flickered and glitched in and out of its instance. "Clyde Welles. What is Clyde Welles?" After thinking for 3 microseconds, the image responded. "There are 49 matches for Clyde Welles in the American territories." "Is there one near the armored Beverly Hills, Admiral?" "Yes, there is one result in that proximity." The Admiral's stomach swirled and revealed a blinking red star in the edge of an upper-class neighborhood called Silver Lake. "Silver Lake," Lisa said out loud. Her Privatonian mind saw a decadent landscape with bejeweled plants and gilded walkways. Walking over to Dirk, who sat at a small bureau, his Privatonian communications setup working at full capacity, Lisa deposited a slip of paper that simply read, "Silver Lake, Los Angeles, Capitalist Empire." Dirk read the paper and looked at Lisa. "Isn't that a little close?" "At this point, it's our last shot before we're recalled, and Silver Lake it is." "Oh, look, Clyde! New neighbors! Or is it only a neighbor?" Lindsey peered through the blinds of her upstairs bedroom, out onto the street and at the large moving truck with its bots unloading box after box. I can only see one person walking around. He looks familiar." Clyde sipped on his coffee, hating the fact that they were out of cream. "Say, you're right. He does look." "Holy crank, it's Dirk," Lindsey said with astonishment. "Oh, you're right." Clyde let out a gruff exhalation. Of all the people to move in, he put his hand over his eyes and scraped down his face in derision. Wait, where's Lisa? Lindsey was silent. The mover bots continued on, unabated. Who? She callously said at last. Lindsey pressed her curves into him. It was 10 years ago, Clyde. I'm sure they've moved on, she said, rubbing the back of his neck. He better have, Clyde grunted. I don't care what he, she, or anyone else says. I am not a bigot. They crossed the line. Clyde was resolute. Sweetheart, I'm sure neither of them meant it. There were so many of us present, and we were all whacked from that stuff Logan brought. Anyone would have been confused by what was happening. Lindsey did her best to comfort Clyde before he blew up. Lindsey, listen, there's more to it than what you think you know. Lindsey stopped stroking his neck and pulled her braless femininity back from resting on his chest. Standing before him in an orange pleated A shirt and green boy shorts, her armpit hair poking out, sharp-nosed blonde Lindsey Welles raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Why would there be more, Clyde? Lindsey's suspicion was certainly warranted. 3 years into their own version of Grease, Clyde pinched the rear of a waitress he swore he didn't recognize at a hotel the couple was staying at in vast Vegas. As it turned out, the waitress was another woman who had quite a bit more than a crush on Clyde left over from high school. An admirer who relegated herself to the wings outside of friendship as Clyde and Lindsey ruled the school from their lofty social perches. Lisa Fairbanks. Clyde swore he didn't know it was her because she looked so different. Lisa was naturally blue-haired, but this waitress had it in a tight blonde bob. Her skin was golden and dotted with gemstones, the hottest trend in Ethiopia and East Africa at the time. Her teeth were perfect, as were her wide hips and her unusually pert and protruding rear. As it later turned out, neither Clyde nor Lindsey had recognized her the first few times she speedily trotted by their table. In truth, Clyde didn't recognize her immediately because he was hiding an adverse reaction to the experimental plants Lindsey had brought for the couple to try while in Vegas. The reaction obscured his vision and short-term memory, affecting Clyde's discretion, causing a brief case of mistaken identity. Lindsey sincerely didn't care what the woman looked like or even who she really was. She was more affected by Clyde's actions themselves rather than any underlying cause. Since then, Lindsey had learned to keep an eye on her shockingly attractive husband and take everything he said in connection to other women with large grains of salt. Yet with so much time having passed, was she valid in having the same suspicion? Listen, hon, Dirk and Lisa, they didn't make a mistake that night. Clyde knew now was the time to tell Lindsey. Oh? No, they didn't. For a while beforehand, Dirk was telling me about these feelings both of them were having. He was getting bored with only having Lisa and vice versa. He said they would always have a blast being out and about, but when they returned home and neither one's parents were around, things would get weird. Weird? It seems pretty self-explanatory to me. Yeah, well, I guess they were really just bored with only physically interacting with each other, but neither one wanted the relationship to end. Clyde groped for a better explanation, but found nothing. So as we were so close on the poly team, he confided in me how they felt. Clyde let out a sigh, the memory still causing painful awkwardness 10 years on. Ultimately, they wanted to include me in their loving? After he explained further, I told him I could be his confidant, but it had to stop there. Clyde shook his head in disgust at the entire situation. You told him that? Lisa seemed surprised. Well, yeah, what else was I supposed to do? Well, you could have said it a little better than that. How so? It had to stop there? Why even mention that? The doorbell rang. You want me to what? Dirk, you didn't question me when I chose this location. Please don't question me now. I know. It just seems... Dirk grabbed at the air, searching for words. Counterintuitive. especially to the mission. You're the one who yelled and hollered at me about using our inherited names, Dirk. Our cover must at all costs be maintained. For the first time since the pair had arrived on Earth, Lisa was being assertive. Look, Lisa continued, just let the underpsyche take over and monitor what it's saying. The memories of these humans are there, and you already know how adept it can be as an artificial intelligence. Just let it talk. The couple looked at each other in stunned silence, then plodded to the door. As her hand went for the knob, Clyde grabbed it and through his teeth said, Look, they targeted both of us that night, and I was not going to have it. Not then, not ever. In one fluid motion, Lindsey expressed shock, disgust, and then excitement at meeting her new neighbor as she opened the front door. Oh my goodness, Dirk Tilden? Lindsey did her best I'm so surprised voice. The shock produced by the underpsyche at seeing two so-called cast members from an earlier chapter in its life, although genuine, came across as exactly as contrived. Hi! Oh my days! It's Lindsey and Clyde Welles! How are you? The three exchanged hugs and pleasantries. Vanal was so far impressed with the fluidity and cognizance of the underpsyche. Spread before him was a mighty river of all the latent and dormant memories of the true Dirk Tilden. The underpsyche, like an octopus, bounded and queued up key moments in Dirk's life that also contained Clyde and Lindsey. Inviting Dirk inside, Lindsey guided the group into the kitchen. Wow, Dirk Tilden, this is truly incredible. We haven't seen you since... Her eyes shifted to Clyde. Look, it's all in the past now. The underpsyche of Dirk Tilden quickly sidestepped any issue that would engender awkwardness, recognizing that the self, Vanal, would have to actively participate in whatever may have been brought up. Lisa and I have accepted who we are, and now we're comfortable with others simply not. I mean no ill will and harbor no grudge. Man, that felt good to say. The three smiled at each other. Well, that's fabulous, Dirk. What brings you out this way? Where had you wound up? Lindsey, carefully dodging any personal mentioning of Lisa, moved to invite the fellow inside. Oh, before you answer, may I offer you something from our garden? Lindsey scooted over to the vanilla French doors that opened to her masterpiece. She waved her hand in front of a warmly golden wall plate, and the doors softly clicked open. Dirk was genuinely impressed by the botanical exposition that was the garden created and maintained by Lindsey Welles. Oh, no thank you. I've still got quite a bit of moving to do, and I need all my senses, Dirk responded after Vanal finished analyzing the bevy of different, thriving flora. The trio shared a devolving and awkward chuckle, during which Clyde subtly eyed Lindsey, mentally harping on her frequent cherry blossom use. Perhaps her nightly trips were to blame for her forgetting that Dirk typically steered clear of her entire field of study and subsequent industry. It wasn't likely, given the synapse-sustaining properties that were present in all of her works, an underlying and crucial ingredient of nearly everything she made. Clyde was, of course, too busy nowadays to care while hearing about the various components and concerns Lindsey had to address and account for when working. But Clyde always needed something to blame, save for himself. Let's see. After high school, I enrolled at the Klein School of Medicine and got my degree in sports medicine. The satisfaction I get from working with injured players is more than enough field experience for me at this point. You mean in contrast to actually playing? Lindsey asked. Yes, exactly. Playing was great, but my body wouldn't cut it at the pro level. Oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that. You are a fantastic halfback and strong safety. Clyde finally spoke up. In addition to playing well, Dirk did so in a rather unusual manner. Dirk refused any and all amplified biobotanics. The toll on his body was tremendous, but he was able to consistently produce for 2 remarkable seasons. The trio moved to the kidney-shaped sunken living room. The new neighbor was greeted with a leather reel wraparound couch. The ambient warmth provided by the heating array woven into the softened cowhide was a welcome surprise for Dirk. The deep white shag never shed, and the windows defogged to reveal the backyard that beautifully eased out of Lindsey's garden. When everyone was settled, Lindsey emerged from the kitchen with a full electric tea kettle and a handheld tea service. "Yeah, I remember." Dirk accepted his mug of bergamot and lemon balm. "Thank you." He looked at the hot liquid and then over Clyde's head into the heaving masses of foliage. "Did you grow the plants yourself?" Dirk asked, indicating his hot cup of tea. "Ooh, yes I did." Lindsey was rightfully proud of her botanical sorcery. "I grow the bergamot in the back, and I have a special Melissa tree at work that I've amplified with a few top-secret compounds. It really brings out the prickliness, doesn't it?" Vanal then took note of the faux effervescence swathing over the tongue he was borrowing, despite the beverage not being carbonated. "Very nice. Anyways, I've been brought over by the firm and hired to their medical staff," Dirk said, knowing the Welles would not investigate this further. Upon arrival, the pair hastily established the legitimacy of the occupations they would tell others about to keep suspicions down. Dirk shuffling off to work in the downtown district at the immense stadium with his logoed tablet, and Lisa, ever the waitress, at a local gastronomic pleasure-centric garden. In reality, though, all of their combined energies were to be directed towards mission completion. Dirk's underpsyche then gave a wink to Clyde, whilst Lindsey's back was quickly turned. "Why did it do that?" Vanal wondered. Clyde flushed and stiffly ambled over to help Lindsey with whatever she was now doing. "Is that so?" Clyde's voice cracked. "Indeed, it is. The season starts pretty soon, and they're finalizing their roster. With me here, I can finally start giving players their physicals and really get to know them." Arriving in the off-season meant the couple had to complete their mission with haste. Trying to maintain an air of gainful employment in the new world of pro sports during a season, while simultaneously trying to complete their mission, was nearly impossible, as the pair had already found out in Dixieland. And really, between your work, Lindsey, and the work being done by Task, a player could have his ACL, MCL, and LCL ripped clean from the bone and within days be running at full speed again. Thank you, Lindsey. And that would explain the plethora of narco-plants in their backyard, Vanal thought. Lindsey flushed at the unexpected praise. "Oh, well, you're welcome, but that's not really my division," Dirk snickered. "That's fine. I'm just so thrilled to be back at home after the last decade of adventure, I guess you could call it." Dirk's underpsyche stole another serious look at Clyde from behind his hot mug. "Well, we're just glad to have another friendly face in the neighborhood," Lindsey set out a tray of digestive crackers. "Oh, no, thank you, dear. I must be back in about our moving in. Lisa will be back any moment, and she'd be upset, to say the least, if she doesn't see me directing the bots around. Thank you for the tea and the warm welcome." Dirk finished his tea and set the mug on the kitchen island they were standing around. After hugs and goodbyes were given, Dirk trotted down the steps that led to the Welles' picturesque estate. The underpsyche was pleased to see that two of its closest humans from the most tumultuous time in its life were well off. Having come from a decade in the great and distinguished Middle West, Dirk had seen how hard some have it. Seeing its friends having a house and a successful capitalist lifestyle, a rarity under the UN, truly gave it a deep sense of relief that resonated into Vanal's dominant consciousness. After all, no being wants to see the one they're in love with as anything but happy. Vanal visibly shook off that last thought as the Welles' door closed behind him. "Lisa!" Dirk closed the door behind him and marched into the kitchen, where Lisa stood before a tall cylindrical vat, gleaning misshapen chunks of gold from a hairy branch of orange Previtonian algae. "Yes, Dirk?" Lisa wrenched a baseball-sized chunk from its furry, leafy enclosure. "What just happened?" He looked at her with incredulity. "Stop it," Lisa froze with disbelief, still holding the massive hunk of pure gold in her hand. "You've never let the underpsyche out to play?" She put the weighty chunk of aurum into an earthen vat full of Previtonian enzymes that kept all gold deposited in a liquid state without heat. "No. Not once." Dirk shook his head with certainty. "Toruk apparently did all the time, and look what happened to him." I know, but he was known for early overindulgence, even on Privatoni. Really? Not even once? Lisa was genuinely surprised at her cohort's perceived lack of curiosity. That was the first and hopefully last time. Dirk dipped his finger into the vat of liquid gold and proceeded to taste that which Lisa had been harvesting. Hopefully last? You know you're going to run into them again. Yes, but I will be in control. I looked around while it was talking, and those two seemed very put off by our presence. Hopefully the peace that the three of them just brokered will stick. And, come to think of it, you're carrying on as if you are now used to having your underpsyche out more often than not. Is that not true? It was. Dirk, well... Lisa had been so put off by Dirk's rage over their mission that she had sort of checked out. Most of the time when Dirk was casually speaking to her, he was talking to the underpsyche. As Dirk scoured over her, Lisa simply remained silent. That is, until he noticed a small glass with a small amount of glowing green snake absinthe. And you're drinking while letting the underpsyche out? Silence. Dirk raised his hand to strike her again, but instead sharply grabbed her jaw. I will not fail this mission because of you. With a shove, he turned and went to continue supervising the bots and maintain the illusion that Lisa was still out running errands. I'm so glad he's gone. Clyde stormed out to the garden and aggressively scanned the ornate display for something containing lorazepam. With a heavy sigh, Lindsey said, Over by the koi pond, Clyde. Her emotions began churning inside her stomach. Lisa Tilden, née Fairbanks, was in town next door, and apparently still in full control of Dirk. Clyde ambled over to the trickling water and the several large, translucent fish that called the ornate pond home. Arranged in a nondescript polygon was a collection of firm-looking loraza lilies. Clyde clumsily picked 3 or 4 buds and began chewing them. Noticing that Clyde was eating and not simply inhaling the pollen, Lindsey plodded over to confront him. Really, Clyde? Was that interaction that bad? You know, if I wasn't married to you, I'd think you were left a little flustered by the whole experience. Lindsey raised an eyebrow, being taken by her long-forgotten ire with Lisa Fairbanks. Lynn, we've talked about this, Clyde said with a mouthful. Oh, I know. Lindsey streamed out of the French doors and unbuttoned the blouse she had put on when Dirk came over. She let out a slow, controlled sigh. Why don't we go and talk about this some more upstairs? Exposing herself to her husband, he then embraced her, at last feeling the effects flood over him from the small flowers. Afterwards, Lindsey congratulated herself on her quick thinking. Had she not intervened and given him a release, he would have either spiraled into reliving the events of their senior trip in high school over and over again for the 40th time, or he simply would have left for another few days. Anytime Clyde got really upset, he would simply leave. So Lindsey, being the smart girl she is, had tracking pollen dusted onto his clothing. After storming off, she would employ bees bred to track said pollen to keep tabs on him. Clyde never really went anywhere bad or did anything to garner her rage. More often than not, he would simply check into a ratty motel near downtown, plow through several snow-white coca orchids, and express his rage on the dilapidated walls. When Lindsey initially discovered this behavior and confronted him about it, she began with full frontal support. Doing this allowed Clyde to open up and explain himself. His rage was kept in check when playing polymatic football, but without that, there was no outlet readily available. So, to protect Lindsey from these spells, he invested in a ratty motel he could go to and let out his aggression without fear of reprisal. Lindsey approved of this, as she was not one to be in a physically abusive relationship. As a result, Clyde is able to get his anger out, and Lindsey is allowed to spend what she wants when she wants without impetus. With Clyde snoring, Lindsey peeked through her shutters and watched Dirk guide the bots around his new home. Lindsey thought back to that oh-so-fateful night. Did she remember it right? Was there something she missed? Clyde certainly wasn't say. The sleek, black Mukherjee Might sky sword containing Lisa Tilden and Lindsey's husband Clyde turned left onto Rodeo. Lindsey watched the two laugh and cajole as they continued on. Pulling herself from her memory, Lindsey saw the light was green and hit the autopilot button nestled on the dash. She then realized that there was no way she could be seen by either one of them. Her husband thinks she's at work, and Lisa, who cared what Lisa thought? What really mattered was why her husband, the man who recoiled at the mere mention of anyone with the now popular names of Lisa or Dirk, could be riding in such a gaudy sword around the gaudiest city in the whole American territories. Lindsey told the autopilot to head home quickly. The powerful machine lifted itself above the single-level traffic and raced for the living tunnel. Lindsey grabbed her clutch and took out her latest klept. The crypto emeralds glistened in the light pouring in from the windscreen. Their internal galaxies whirled and twinkled. As she gazed into the dazzling core of each emerald, her mind continued working unabated. Suddenly, it hit her. If she continued feigning ignorance of what she saw, she could get Lisa to spy on Clyde, thus playing both parties and hopefully throwing a wrench into whatever he and Lisa were cooking up. Initially, the thought was repulsive, the using of another person, especially an old friend/rival, but after musing on the topic for a while, she knew it was the only way to know for certain what either one was really up to. Remembering several instances from their shared past, Lindsey recalled Lisa's penchant for damsels in distress. If she could confide in Lisa about Clyde's coolness, she was certain her plan would work. "Oh, poor me," she would tell her. "He doesn't touch me. He won't listen to me." On and on. A sly smile filled her sculpted face as her sword emerged from the living tunnel. The sword parked itself in the driveway, and Lindsey scuttled out. After an hour or so, Dirk arrived at his house next door, and 30 minutes after that, Clyde was home. Lisa arrived not too long after Clyde did. Lindsey took note of the various tableaux Lisa was lugging from her sword into the 3-story monster next door to theirs. Her long legs and obtrusive rear end made her into some sort of mantis in Lindsey's eyes. New-looking cricket gear, some sort of golden T-square. What was she up to? Following the initial greeting, Lindsey had gone out of her way to avoid Lisa as much as possible and remained completely ignorant of what Lisa does with her time. Clyde had become cautiously curious about Dirk's work with the team, but Lindsey simply could not care any less about Lisa, as she didn't care at all to begin with. Clyde came in through the garage and set his things down on the davenport next to the door. Needing to clear his mind, Clyde went straight for the garden, missing Lindsey, who was perched in the breakfast nook reading the evening infocast. Clyde again searched the garden for the correct plant needed for his particular frustration. "Hey, hon," Clyde called in. "I'm looking for in the middle, near the row of cosmos." Lindsey already knew what plant he sought. "Oh, yeah. Say, how did you know?" "A woman has her ways," she baited. "Does she now?" Clyde strolled back into the house, ready to be around his frau. The flower, a daisy interbred with a mild amphetamine, twirled in his fingers. Bringing it to his nose, he softly inhaled the essence and instantly felt his eyes brighten and things around him begin to perk up. Clyde smiled as he walked towards Lindsey. Lindsey caught the smile and knew this was the time to initiate her game. "Oh, Clyde, it's been so nice seeing you smiling again." Lindsey bit her bottom lip and opened her arms for a hug, displaying her bare chest and unshaven armpits for his delight. Playing on his ravenous love for hirsute women almost always worked to get him right where she needed him. Clyde continued strolling right past his waiting wife and on into the liquor pantry. Looking carefully over the collection he had built over the years, Clyde at last chose a pre-war scotch he had been saving. The cork popped off after a small amount of effort. The aroma filled his excited nostrils with scents of old wood, a dusty western hallway, toasted marshmallows, and vanilla. He next chose another heirloom, a uranium glass given him by his grandfather. Clyde filled the glass and finished the beverage with chilled soapstones in place of ice cubes. When Lindsey saw his concoction, She knew her game absolutely and with extreme prejudice needed to be played. "Clyde, I'm going to the zoo tomorrow," she said while expediently closing her shirt. Halfway through the initial sip, Clyde's ears caught the words. Upon their completion, he sharply flung the remaining liquid down his throat and poured another. "Oh yeah? You think you're ready?" Clyde still would not even look at his wife. Lindsey took the dig in stride. "Yes, Clyde, I'm ready. I know how long it's been and I won't let the fear restrain me any longer. I need to get back there. I need to finish my work." Lindsey's hands had begun to shake. Another gulp of scotch. "Well, if you say so. But don't come crying to me if you get spooked. I still don't think you're ready." In her mind's eye, Lindsey saw herself wresting the uranium glass from his hands and jamming it into his neck, his cold black blood pouring out all over the counter. Or maybe he's really one of those husk people from Mexico that the Ultranet goes on about. Who believes in that anyway, she thought. With help like that, how could I ever be ready? "Look, Lynn, we've done this before." At last, Clyde turned to face his wife. "I'm the one who told you, remember, not to go in the enclosure." His voice rose. "You and your plants. You didn't even think of how I would have felt had you not been rescued." "Well, what am I supposed to do? You won't put any kids in me, no matter how bad I beg, and all these sick things you talk me into doing just so you can get yours. Sick. You're calling me sick? First off, you never complained before. And second, sick is wanting a brood of genetic copies of yourself, screaming, crying, pooping, everywhere. That's sick." Clyde took another swig, taking a breath to calm herself and simultaneously remembering her plan. Lindsey removed herself from the conversation. "Clyde, oh my precious Clyde." Lindsey scoffed and sauntered upstairs. Several seconds later, a blanket and pillow dropped from the balcony overlooking their living room. Next, Clyde heard the bedroom door close and then lock. Seething with contempt, Clyde tore into the backyard garden and targeted her precious cherry blossoms. He searched for and found their axe. Raising the gleaming blade, he noticed several blossoms missing. Freshly plucked, he could tell, due to their oozing. He turned his head and saw the soft glow of their 3D television blasting their bedroom with color. The axe gently lowered as another memory made its way into his mind. That of Lindsey being mobbed by gorillas in the LA Zoo.